It's really good to be here with you, and appreciate you all being here. Our theme is created for connection, because I believe, and we're going to see that very specifically tonight, that's how God, our Creator, created us. He created us to be in connection with other people. In the Genesis story of the creation, it is not good for the man to be alone. And so we're going to talk more about what God says to us through some New Testament passages tonight about God's plan for marriage and how we mess it up. The first week we talked about the brain and the neural pathways of the brain. The main takeaway from lesson number 1 is we cannot control the thoughts that come into our mind, but we can control the thoughts that stay on our minds. So you're driving your car, you're listening to the radio, or you're seeing billboards, your other drivers and road rage or whatever is going on around about you. You come home, you're watching television, you're on the internet, you're engaged with your family in some form or fashion. Something can happen that triggers some really negative thoughts, some really reactionary kinds of thoughts, some anger thoughts, or whatever. You can't control what initially comes into your mind. But we learned from lesson number 1 that we absolutely can control. In fact, that's the way we're built. We can control what stays on our mind. So in the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus said, it was said to you before, don't kill, do not murder. I say to you, don't be angry. And what he means there is don't let anger dwell on your minds. Don't focus on anger. Don't let those neural pathways grow and proliferate. So Colossians. Have I got Colossians passage here? I've got it there. Let's see. I've got a different one here. I'm sorry, but Colossians 3:8 through 10 is where Paul writes, "But now you yourselves are to put off these." So it is possible. Put off these what? Anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth. Do not lie to one another, since you have put off the old man with his deeds and have put on the new man, who is renewed in knowledge according to the image of him who created him. So focus on putting off these things that are self-defeating, self-destructive, and will also ultimately destroy our relationships. Last week we talked about self-understanding. Meaning this, that what are some of the things that we bring into our marriages with us? What are some things from our families in which we grew up? What are some lessons that we've learned along the way? Sometimes maybe negative lessons, self-defeating lessons. It's the better we know ourselves, the better we understand ourselves, then the better we will be able to manage ourselves. So we need to know what genetic predispositions, what learned behavior patterns, what things about my childhood and early years am I bringing into my marriage. It's going to help tremendously for us to manage when storms happen in our marriages. So what I'll tell you is that these are the remaining lessons coming up for not exactly the next 4 weeks, but 4 lessons over the next 5 weeks. Next week we're going to talk about the chemistry of love. And again, I want you to remember, this is how we're built. This is how God made us. But we haven't known about this stuff until the fairly recent past. What kinds of chemicals, hormones are released into our systems when we are attracted to somebody, and how it affects the way that we think, and it affects the way that we feel. The following week, 2 weeks from today, we're going to talk about attraction and coming together. What are some of the the factors that bring people together in the first place. Then we're going to take a break on October 5. There's something else going on here at church that Wednesday night. On the 12th, we're going to talk about disconnection and really it should read a lack of safety. These are the two things that people, when they come for marriage counseling, couples counseling, they bring with them, is a certain level of disconnection and a lack of safety. Most of the time, it's not physical safety that they are lacking, but it's emotional safety. And when we don't feel safe with each other, we are not going to be connected. That's the bottom line for that. And then October 19th, we're going to talk about safe conversations. I've got a website there at the bottom of that page, and I'd like for you to jot it down and look it up. Because this is an initiative, a program that I and the counselors in my office are all involved with. It's a safe. I've been doing counseling, marriage and family counseling for 35 years. This is the best couples communication program that I've ever been a part of, that I've ever seen. That's why we are all involved. And if you want to kind of make a note of this, on October 15, my counselors and I are going to be presenting a Safe Conversations workshop. It's on a Saturday. It's not Texas OU Day. I think it's the week after that. We planned around that. But it's going to be at the Preston Crest Church of Christ. If you look on safeconversations.org, there will be some information about that. It's a Saturday. There's no charge for this. All materials and meals are provided. And it's not just for couples who are in trouble, but it's for all couples who want to enhance and help their communication processes and how they talk to each other and how they listen to each other.
It's
yes,
not Billy Baptist and Becky Baptist either.
No, it's not. No, that's right. If you're familiar with the names Harville, well, I'll talk about Harville and Helen here in just a minute. I've got pictures of them, in fact, some show and tell. Tonight, we're going to talk about God's plan for our marriages. And I suspect that most everybody here has a very, very good idea of what God wants for our marriages. I'm going to add a little bit of stuff that maybe you're not aware of, but I'm going to look at three passages, first of all, that are familiar to you, probably most of you. Galatians 3, 26 through 28. But now you yourselves are to put off all these. Hey, I just read that, didn't I? That's what I read just a second ago. I thought it sounded familiar. Put off all these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, and so forth. Specific to marriage, Ephesians 5, 21 through 33. And what I've done is just excerpted some phrases from that passage where Paul is writing. In verse 21, he said, submitting to one another in the fear of God. See, and that's a verse that frequently is not emphasized. It's emphasized that wives are instructed to submit to their husbands. But what we are all instructed to here in our marriages is to submit to one another. There's a mutual submission process. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies, for we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. One more passage in Colossians 3, 18 through 21. Wives, submit to your own husbands as it is fitting to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be bitter toward them. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. Oh, shoot, another typo. That should be fathers, not gathers. See, those two, they're really, really close on the keyboard. Fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. And so what I want to emphasize here is that we know how women have been treated historically, throughout history, and across cultures. That women typically have been treated as possessions, as servants, as slaves even, and are supposed to do, and in some areas of the world, that is still the way that that culture or that particular system of religion operates. We know also how many women are treated today. So I just remember when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, young adult, and women's liberation was in full bloom back then, and it was not always, but often taught and implied that Christianity forced women into submission, that Christianity was a negative force for women and did not allow them to be who they really are. And what I want you to understand, if you know anything about history and the history of the world, when Christianity came to the world, if you know anything about it, you have to know that Christianity has been the most liberating movement ever for women. The way, and what Paul wrote in these passages, Ephesians, Colossians passages, that's absolutely revolutionary. We'll come to another couple of things here. And so what the New Testament teaches us that God wants for our marriages is mutual submission, mutual respect, mutual support, mutual love and cherishing, and mutual sacrifice and nourishing. And so marriage, and you already know this, but I'll just repeat it one more time. Used to be said, yeah, marriage is a 50-50 proposition. No, nothing could be further from the truth. Marriage is a 100-100 proposition. Now, I know the math doesn't add up, but one of my responsibilities as a husband is to give 100% of what I have and who I am to my marriage. My wife's responsibility is to give 100% of what she has and who she is to the marriage. And so again, don't get hung up on the math, but understand when several places in the New Testament when Paul says there is neither male nor female, there is neither Greek nor Jew nor Greek, there's neither slave nor free. That's one of the most revolutionary things that had been written in that culture and that day and time. And so I just want you to remember that Christianity has been the most liberating movement ever for women, and don't buy what other people may be trying to sell. So one more point to this point. Any belief system, religious system, Islam, any belief system that enables one person to abuse another person, to bully another person, to demean another person, to disregard, to disrespect, and to treat the other person as less than equal, that's not from God. That is not from God. And there are some belief systems that do not only support that, encourage that. And that is not a system from God, because God has made His stand very, very clear. So what do we do to mess up God's plan? Well, unfortunately, we do a lot. I want to introduce you to two couples who, throughout the years of my private practice, have been very, very powerful and consistent mentors to me. You may know the names Dr. Harville Hendricks and Dr. Helen LaKelly Hunt. They are a husband-wife team. Helen is one of H.L. Hunt's daughters. So she grew up in Dallas. She grew up going to First Baptist Church in Dallas. And she says, I've heard her say this in a presentation, that if you want to know what my childhood was like, what my family of origin was like, then watch the old Dallas TV series. That was our family, with all the wealth, with all the greed, with all the dysfunction, with all the backbiting and everything that was represented in that TV show, she said, I grew up with. Dr. Harville Hendricks also has Dallas roots. He used to teach at SMU Perkins Theological Seminary. They got married. They've lived in New York City for about 40 years until about 3 years ago, when they came back to Dallas and they started the Safe Conversations initiative. So they are the originators, the propagators, the financiers of the Safe Conversations program, and they are just as genuine as any two people that I've ever met. The other couple who have been mentors for me are Doctors John and Julie Gottman. John and Julie Gottman live and work in Seattle, Washington. They are connected to the University of Washington, and they have done research on couples for 40 years. And they've learned a lot of stuff that none of us ever knew before, because nobody had ever done this kind of research before. So anything that you see that is written by the Gottmans or the Hendrickses or Helen LaKelly Hunt, I can pretty much endorse that, because they are just really, really solid people. So what do we do to mess up the situation? Well, the Gottmans came up with this concept, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. This is something that we do, that individuals and couples do to each other, that can have a serious detrimental impact on the other person and on the relationship. You know what? I just decided I'm going to pause right here and take a deep breath and take a drink of water, because I really do want to give you an opportunity. I say that, but I haven't given you the opportunity yet. Jump in, raise your hand, make comments, ask questions, interrupt me if I don't give you an opening. But I'm going to give you the opening right now. If you have anything to add or anything to ask, I'll say one more thing. See, I told you I was going to give you an opportunity, but then I lied to you. When I teach an SMU class on marriage and family therapy, and I use one book that was written by the Gottmans, I use another book that was written by the Hendrickses as texts in that class. That's how much I think about them. Okay, I'm going to take a drink now.
Are the Gottmans and the Hendricks Christians?
The Gottmans are devout Jews, and he wears his yarmulke at every presentation that I've seen. They're totally respectful of other religious belief systems, but they don't make any bones about their Jewish faith. Anything else?
How long you say they've been married, this couple?
The Gottmans, I think, have been married over 40 years. The Hendrickses are each in second marriages. They developed this whole system of couples communication. They started working on it. They had each come out of bad marriages. They found each other, and then they started having trouble in their marriage. That scared them both. They said, we don't want to do this. They started researching, why do couples fight? I'm going to say a little bit more about that in just a minute. But to the best of my understanding, they've been married to each other for over 30 years. And they really do practice what they preach, which is always nice. 4 horsemen of the apocalypse represents 4 things that we do to each other. And any of these can have a very, very corrosive and erosive effect on the relationship. The first one is criticism. See, criticism is when I am telling my partner, this is what I think is wrong with you. Sometimes I may think, now, when she hears me tell her what I think is wrong with her, then she's going to get better. She's going to say, oh my goodness, I didn't get that. I never realized that. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. I get it. And what that means is, I'm kind of telling her that our marriage would be better if you were more like me. Okay, criticism is what I think is wrong with, and the lists are endless. In one of the books I use, there's a long list. There's like a 40-item list. What's wrong with Jim? Is anybody in here named Jim? Or maybe you wouldn't admit it now if it was. What's wrong with Jim? Well, Jim doesn't listen. Jim doesn't show his feelings. Jim doesn't help around the house. Jim isn't a good planner. Jim is a couch potato. Jim leaves his dirty clothes all around. Jim doesn't feed the cat. When Jim does feed the cat, he doesn't wipe off the fork and it gets all crusty. See, that, like I say, the list is endless. But the point that I want to make is there's something wrong with everybody. There really is. No, not you. I'm sorry. I counsel with a couple. In fact, I still see them occasionally. There's a couple that are about my age. They've been married over 40 years to each other, and they see me for a variety of reasons, but they've been kind of disconnected from each other. So I like to ask couples, how did you meet? How did you meet each other? And because it almost always brings a smile to their face, no matter how mad they are at each other. When they start thinking about how they met and how much fun they had and what attracted them to each other. So I asked this couple, how did y'all meet each other? And she said, she told me this. She said, early in our relationship, he used to send me love letters. I said, wow, that's really sweet. Then he said, yes, and then she returned them with grammatical errors corrected in red pencil.
Is that guy named Jim?
It could be. And she says, I was a school teacher, you know. But what she and then he said, and she wondered why I stopped writing. Right? But that was a not so subtle way of saying, hey, Jim, this is what's wrong with your letter. This is what's wrong with you. And so there are lots of ways, major and minor, in which we criticize each other. Criticism also leads to derogatory labeling. So when we start using labels, it's a very, very dangerous sign. It's a very slippery slope. He's selfish. She's insensitive. He's lazy. She's controlling. He's passive. You know the labels. And that's all under the heading of criticism. A second horseman of the Gottmans is contempt. And the way they define contempt this is really important, because this is the single best predictor of divorce in a marital relationship. If there is a consistent pattern of contempt, when one partner treats the other as if he or she is less than. If I elevate myself to a level of importance or intelligence or whatever it is, I see myself as greater than, and I see her as less than. That is contempt. It's putting myself in a one-up position. I'm better, I'm smarter, I'm wiser, whatever, and I'm looking down. The Gottmans give a really great example of this. So they do a little role play where they're in an argument, and it's a role play argument, and so finally she just throws up her hand. She said, well, frankly, dear, I could care less. And he said, no, sweetheart. You see, the correct way to say it is, I couldn't care less. Because if you could care less, you still care, but what you intended to say, what you really should say. So he's in a one-up position, talking down to her, correcting her grammar in mid-argument. He said they counseled with a couple where that actually happened. A third of the four horsemen is defensiveness. Now, defensiveness comes as a result of the first two, of course. If I get criticized, then very naturally I'm going to want to defend myself because I don't agree with the criticism. Or I'm going to say, you know what? I'm not the only one who's got some problems here. Oh yeah, well you also. And so that's never going to end any place good. So defensiveness is the third of the four horsemen. Stonewalling is the fourth. Stonewalling is where there is consistent disconnect, distance, and it's a result of the first three. where we just really have gotten to a point where we don't want to talk to each other, we don't want to listen to each other. Let me go back and say something I forgot to say about contempt. According to the Gottman's research, when there is a consistent, ongoing pattern of contempt, that is predictive of divorce 93% of the time. It is the single biggest predictor of a couple that is headed for divorce. Doesn't contempt, yeah. And the others are also predictive, but not nearly to that level of predictivity. Other things I'll go through kind of quickly here. Negativity, and this comes from the Hendrickses, that when we treat each other negatively, and think about the root of the word, it really is an attempt. I may not understand this is what I'm doing, but it's an attempt to negate the other person. All right? So I wear this what color is this? Turquoise? What color is that? Okay. This is the only bracelet of this type I've ever worn. It goes with Safe Conversations. And what this reminds, it's a zero negativity bracelet. It reminds me that I don't want to do anything to anybody, but especially to my wife. I don't want to say anything that's negative. I don't want to treat her in any kind of way that is critical or contemptuous or in any other way negative, because, and the main reason is this, what we have to remember is that negativity is emotional annihilation. When someone speaks to you negatively, okay, we talked about the brain 2 weeks ago. What do you think happens in your brain when you perceive negativity or you perceive a threat or some kind of an attack by another person? What's your brain do? Oh, yeah. Yeah, fight or flight. There's really a third one we're using now, a fight, flight, or freeze. Like some animals will freeze out of self-defense. But any of those things is the same thing. If I feel attacked, if I feel threatened, my autonomic nervous system is going to kick into gear immediately, instantaneously. It's not a choice I make. It's something my body does because that's the way it's made. It's built for survival. And so when I'm critical or when I'm negative to my wife, I need to understand that her brain is kicking into defense mode. She's going into survival mode. She becomes hyper vigilant. And you know what? She's not listening to me anymore because she's thinking about what do I need to do to take care of myself. Okay? So that's one of the biggest problems with negativity. It really stops any constructive communication right there in its tracks. Anger is a result of many. Anger. Well, let me show you this. A client shared this with me. And what I'm going to do, this is called the anger iceberg. Can you see it? You may not be able to see it because a lot of the print is very small. Client just shared that with me last week. And so the next blog that I'm going to send out, I'm going to write this weekend hopefully, is going to be a word about anger. And how what you see on the surface is anger, but underneath the surface there are 100 other things going on. There is fear, there is frustration, there is confusion, there is nervousness, there is regret, there is helplessness, there is guilt, there is grief, there is shame, and all of those are under the surface of the water. So we don't show those to other people, but other people can certainly see our anger, and so you'll read more about that if you're on the email list. Some others: negativity, anger, broken connection. All couples suffer broken connections at times. Not all of these are major, and most of them can be repaired when we know how to repair them. But some of them, the ones that are not addressed, become worse and more serious and more broken and more disconnected as time goes on. Woundedness and fear. What I want to say about this is that connection in a marriage, in any relationship, but especially in a marriage, is all about safety. It's all about safety. When two people come into a counselor's office for couples counseling, two things are almost always true of that couple. One is they are disconnected, and one is that one or both of them don't feel safe in that relationship. And so our job as therapists, and what I will almost always try to do, depending upon the circumstance, is to help that couple learn how to communicate in a way that they learn, again, how to be safe with each other. They used to feel safe with each other in the beginning of the relationship. But they've lost that. One or both of them has lost that. And so it's all about safety. You are not going to connect with anybody who you don't feel safe with. Those connection and a lack of safety are mutually exclusive propositions. And so what we try to help people do is to learn how to talk so that they can learn how to be safe again. Some predictability to my life. And so, yeah, I do agree with what you're saying. When he loses a job, it's a crisis. It's a crisis for everybody. But if he stays out of a job, or if he's just not particularly that interested in looking for another job, that just kicks in, kicks every alarm system that she has, and that's not an unusual circumstance, set of circumstances. One of the things that I share with my clients is this: that I truly believe that one of my most important jobs as a husband is to help my wife feel safe in our relationship. So when I leave, I left this afternoon. She worked really, really hard this afternoon. She's spent. She's not, I'm not meaning in an alcohol sense. She is spent. But I told her, I said, I'm going to go teach my class and then I'm going to come home. She should have no reason to wonder, I wonder where he really is. What's he really doing? Who is he really with? I leave in the morning, I come to my office. I'm seeing clients in the morning. And if I'm doing my job and helping her feel safe, then she should have no reason to wonder, to doubt, or to question any of those things. She should have no reason to question my fidelity or anything else, my work ethic. All of the things that you mentioned, all of those are factors that feed into the safety thing. So if she feels unsafe, I've got to look at myself. What am I doing, or what am I not doing that's contributing to that? By the way, it's her job too. Her job is just as important as mine. Her job is to help me feel safe every day in our relationship. And we do that in 100 different ways, just like you will do. We treat each other with courtesy and respect and appreciation, and on and on and on, consistently, with gratitude. Remember, we're talking about neural pathways here. And those neural pathways need to be strengthened and exercised every day. I'll just say one more thing, and most of you know this. Couples sometimes will come to my office and one or both of them have been talking about divorce. Okay? And divorce has become a very prominent word in their discussions. And one of the things I can say very, very, very unequivocally, don't talk about divorce. Research is very, very clear on this. The couples that talk about divorce are more likely to divorce. And mainly because that they get desensitized to the word and to, they think, the more they think about divorce, the more they think about it. All right? And so I suggest, and I counsel couples, don't even let that word be a part of your vocabulary. That doesn't mean you're not going to divorce, but don't even let yourself dwell on that possibility. Anybody else? What I've found in teaching classes like this is that most of the time the classes go better if I talk less and you talk more. But yes, please.
On horrible intelligence,
They are. I don't know what brand. They go to church, but I'm not sure where they are in their faith at this moment. But they very openly talk about faith. They very openly talk about Jesus. And they use the biblical principles in much of their teaching. They also want to reach a wide audience, so they don't exclusively talk like we are talking in this class tonight.
Dr. Duncan, Helen,
Go ahead. He was. You're going to follow up on that?
I was just gonna ask, in the weeks ahead, would you be mentioning or touching on, what Jesus said about divorce?
That's not a part of this curriculum. Well, I thought you were going to ask. I'll go ahead and answer the question you didn't ask. But in the Safe Conversations workshop that we're going to do in October, I and all of the counselors in my office, we are very Christian oriented. We all go to church on a regular basis. Our faith is a very important part of our life, and so that will be a part of that workshop. But as far as the divorce and remarriage question, I'm not prepared in this curriculum to address that. Yes?
Doctor, what would you say about the more non-traditional marriages where the woman is not seeking security from
Would you speak up a little bit? I'm having a little bit of trouble.
I'm trying to articulate what I'm trying to say. What would your response be to the more non-traditional marriages where the woman is not seeking financial security from her husband?
All right.
She's the head of household, financially. Yes, like in a non-traditional marriage, for instance, a woman would make more than the husband.
Right.
What would you say to that?
Well, I would say that's not an unusual situation, at least in my experience these days. But I would say that the same principles apply, absolutely, regardless of financial standing, regardless of who makes more. And we're going to talk in a few minutes about issues. Power is one of the issues that a lot of couples fight about, and sometimes money is at the heart of that discussion. So if he makes more, he may feel as if he has more power in the relationship. If she makes more, she may feel that way as well. I don't think any of that is contradictory to or negates any of the readings that we read from Paul a few minutes ago. The mutual submission, the mutual respect, the mutual love and sacrifice, and all of those things. But to your question, that can really get in the way.
Well, I was just piggybacking on what the guy in the yellow shirt has said about.
You mean that guy right back there? Okay.
Yeah. I said about how the shift changed when his
Yeah.
father lost his job.
Yeah.
Like how does that?
You know, my experience is when husband and wife are both doing what we can do to create a safe culture of a marriage, a safe marital culture, then we're going to be able to withstand those crises, those transitions in life, a job loss or a loss of health. Lots of different things can just come out and slap us across the face, as everybody in here knows. But I don't. What we want to do is, of course, keep our eyes on God and follow His principles, and not let other factors, outside external factors, dictate the kind of marriage we have, or how much we respect or love or cherish each other. That there are lots of different things that can get in the way if we allow them to get in the way. I'm going to defer that to just a few minutes. We're going to get to a section on triggers and issues in just a minute, and you'll kind of understand a little bit more about what I'm talking about. Rick, you were going to say something a minute ago.
Helen is, she grew up in the First Baptist.
Right.
Church of
Right.
Dallas, and she talks about that a lot. I just
Yeah.
wanted to throw that
Yeah, I don't know where she is aligned right now, religiously or denominationally, but they are both people of faith, and they have both have strong faith backgrounds. Anybody else?
On that negativity,
Pardon?
you touch on that first one, the negativity, that's a tough one, because I was just thinking, sometimes people don't know they're negative.
Yeah.
They're a half empty glass versus a half full, and if one partner or the other is like that, you can't just say, hey, wife, or hey, husband, don't like being around you.
Yeah.
You're always negative, you're always pessimistic, half empty. That's a tough one to get on.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
You can't just go to your spouse that way, because you might as well go to the motel.
Right.
And it also goes with the criticism, right?
Yeah.
How do you address a problem
Yeah.
without being critical?
That's right.
almost impossible.
That's right. But that's what you'll learn that in safe conversation. How to now? You have to address what needs to be addressed. But there are ways to do that in non-negative and non-critical ways. For example, I can sit down with my wife and say, honey, I'm concerned about something. Can we talk about this? And she will say yes. And here's what I'm concerned about. I'm not pointing a finger at her. I'm not criticizing her. I'm not being negative to her. But I am openly telling her one of my concerns. And if we know how to address that, how to continue that dialogue, we can talk about it. We can come to some resolution and mutual understanding about that. To your question about negativity, it's a really terrific question. And I hate to say this because my wife's not here to defend herself, but she and I talk about this all the time, and she says, well, what do you want to do for dinner tonight? And I said, well, why don't we go to, well, it doesn't matter where I say. Why don't we go to Fish City? She says, we're not going to be able to get in there. That's her first reaction. It's going to be crowded out the door. We'll never be able to get a table. Yeah, and then okay, let's go to Mi Casino. It's too late. We're not going to be able to get. That's her knee-jerk reaction. So we can laugh about it now. And I'll say, well, let's take a chance on it. Let's just throw caution to the wind, and let's just see if we can slip in the side door or something. And I can kind of joke about it, and she gets it, and she chuckles with me about that. She understands that. But that's not the serious thing. But there are serious, there are seriously anxious people with anxiety disorders are going to be more prone to think that nothing is going to happen that's good. Everything that's going to happen is going to be bad, and that can have a real that can have a real draining effect on the other person. And I would say that does need to be addressed, because it can just kind of let the air out of everybody's balloon, especially the person who's making the suggestion, why don't we do this? No, that's not going to work. Well, let's do this. No, that's not going to work. And you can feel like you're a puppeteer, and you're saying, do you like this? Do you like this? But she may not like anything, or he may not like it. Say again?
That's the truth be known. No one likes to be around a
Yeah,
negative person.
yeah.
If you're always negative, the marriage not going to work.
Yeah.
It's not going to work. Because no one likes to be around a negative person.
I'll just say this. There are ways to address that. In fact, we're going to go into that. Our last class session, we're going to talk about safe conversations in here. And I'm going to give you some thoughts. And in fact, we may do some role play. You all may pair up, and I'll give you. Now nobody's going to come back. Okay, scratch that. We're never going to do that. We're not going to do that. Thanks for your comments and your questions. Let me just kind of go through a couple of things here. Relationships have rules. And now, we all know it. We may not agree on what the rules are, and we may not always follow the same rules, but there's a really, really neat little analogy that I share with couples sometimes. Here's a guy, he has watched tennis on TV, but he's never played tennis. And he says, tennis looks like it's a lot of fun. I think I'm going to go out and play some tennis. And so he goes to a sports store and he buys a tennis racket, a can of balls, tennis outfit, nice shoes, socks, headband. He finds a tennis court. But he doesn't know anything about tennis, and so he opens up the can of balls and he hits one across the net, and then he hits another one across the net, and then he runs around the net and he gets the balls and he hits them back, just like they were doing on TV. He doesn't know what the white lines are all about, and he doesn't know the object of the game, and he doesn't really know how to hold the rackets. And but here's the point, he's working really, really hard, and after a few minutes, he works up a sweat. And he's been working really hard, and he comes off the tennis court and he says, you know, tennis is not very much fun. And the way he's playing it, he's absolutely right about that. But what he needs is very, very simple. He needs some education about what the object of the game is. What are the rules of the game? What do the white lines mean? He may need some coaching. And somebody to say, you know, here's a forehand, a backhand, there's an overhead, this is how you serve, this is where you place your feet, and this is how you stand receiving a serve. You know, that kind of thing. And it needs practice. It's not rocket science, okay? And marriage is not rocket science, but many people come into my office and other offices like mine, and they will say, we're not having a good time. We're working really hard at this thing, and it's wearing us out. And I will usually say, yeah, the way you're doing it, it would wear me out too. Yeah. And they need the same thing that the guy learning how to play tennis needs, and that is you know, some education, some coaching, and some practice. And tennis and marriage can become a lot more fun and come a lot more satisfying. I want to just briefly, let's see what I want to do next. I think I'm going to kind of skip over this part. Yeah, I won't skip completely over it, but I'll go kind of quickly through it. All conflicts are not created equal. All conflicts are not alike. And so you've got that on your outline, that there are situational conflicts. Situational conflicts have to do with, where do you want to eat tonight? Well, I'd prefer Mexican food. No, I'd really like to go to the cafeteria or whatever. And somebody may get their feelings hurt, but probably not, because we'll go to your place tonight and we'll go to my place tomorrow. Those are situational conflicts. Usually have to do with preferences and are not any big deal. And in fact, if we do get into a little dust up over that, it'll seem silly later when we're talking about it. A second, but a more serious type of conflict is what we call temperamental or habitual conflicts. One of them is very, very neat, and the other is not. And not obsessed with cleanliness or neatness. So one of them, one closet, I mean, all the hangers are an inch apart. That kind of borders on OCD probably. But you know, these two people are attracted to each other. We're frequently attracted to people who are different from us in the initial stages, but those differences can become real irritants after we are married and live with each other for a little while. Here's one, you know, somebody who really wants to be at church, at meetings, at work on time. Well, what does on time mean? It means different things. Some people think, I'm not late. I mean, the meeting hasn't started until I get there. You know, okay, maybe it's 10 minutes after they said it was going to start. But to some people, that's not late. And to some people, if I don't get there 10 minutes early than the starting time, I'm late. And that can become a real source of irritation and aggravation in some relationships. These are, you know, one person likes to read, the other person likes to watch TV more. These have to do with preferences. One person's very extroverted and just wants to go and do. And the other person's very introverted. And so the extrovert says, come on, let's go out. We haven't been out in forever. And the introvert says, what do you mean? We went out 3 weeks ago. That was like day before yesterday. I don't need to go out again. So these are very real areas of difference that can result in areas of conflict. The real serious types of conflict have to do with structural conflicts. As the name implies, this is the building of the marriage relationship. This is the foundation of the marriage relationship. And when we got structural problems, we got really problems. We got structural foundation problems at home. Now, some foundations can be shored up and can be saved, but some foundations may be past the point of fixing. But these are conflicts that can be toxic. And so what I want to spend probably the rest of our time is on triggers and issues. Yes?
Can you give me examples of structural?
Yeah, I'll get there in about 2 minutes. But thanks for that question. That's where we're going. So when people come in for marriage counseling, and you do an internet search, and you ask the question, why do couples fight? What are you going to come up with if you plug that into a search engine? What are some of the reasons couples fight? Money? Huh? Infidelity?
How to raise a kid.
Yeah, children, sex, in-laws, family, household chores, those. But what I want couples to understand is that's not what we're fighting about. Those are the triggers. And the triggers always trigger something much deeper and much more important. So we got money, we got in-laws, sex, children, careers, housework, and so forth. The real issues. So if a couple comes into my office and say, we fight about money, I say, you're in the wrong place. You need to go to a financial advisor. I don't know anything about money. I mean, I pay my bills, but I don't know how to advise. Well, they don't really fight about money. But what they fight about is, what does money mean to him, and what does money mean to her? Maybe money means to him that he grew up poor, and he's going to save every bit of money that they make so that they can retire and enjoy their retirement. And money means to her, yeah, I get the retirement thing, but I want us to have some fun now. I want us to go on a vacation. And couples will come in and say, we haven't been on a vacation in years. And so I don't know what their financial situation is, but see, that's not what they're fighting. They're not fighting about money, but money is a trigger. So some of the meanings behind the triggers are the real issues. The real issues that have to do with power and trust and respect and emotional safety. Those are the real issues. So when we fight about sex, we're not fighting about sex, we're fighting about what sex means to her and what sex means to him. We fight about children, we're not really fighting about children, but the meanings attached to that. Do I feel safe? Do I feel respected? Do I feel trusted and trusting? And is the power in our relationship at a balance where we can both appreciate and enjoy the balance. So power has to do with who's in control. Like I said a few minutes ago, sometimes that may be a function of who makes the most money. It should not be. Should not be that way. The earning power of one person versus the other person should have nothing to do with the power in a relationship. And in a healthy, balanced relationship, both people have power. Their power may not be in the same areas, because he may have some skills in this area, she may have some skills in the other area. But they both need to have some power in the relationship. I'm not going to abuse your time and send us overtime, but there's a certain cycle that happens in relationships, and I'm just going to ever so briefly go through the items on the cycle. There are the triggers that we just talked about. There are the issues. When we can really start talking about the issues, that's what we need to be talking about. But on their own, they engage in a dialogue, and a lot of times it's like they're reading from a script. He says this, she says this. He says this, she says this. And they don't get very far in that. And so ultimately they get stuck. and they get really, really frustrated because the chances are they've had this conversation many times over and they get to the same place because they're saying the same things. They are exhausted. They retreat to their separate corners, and then when something else triggers, they repeat the same cycle again. Sometimes they seek help. Sometimes. Statistically, 13% of couples who have trouble are going to ever present for professional help. With a pastor, a minister, with a counselor, 13%. And that means a vast majority of people are going to live in this situation until death do them part. But then somebody will make a call, will make the call, and what is the, okay, yeah, the average, I'll ask you the question. What do you think is the average length of time for a couple to have problems before somebody reaches out for help to someone, to a professional or to a minister of some sort? Average length of time for them to have trouble before somebody reaches out. Got a guess?
6 years.
How did you know that? It's between 6 and 7 years. Yeah, and that's a pretty good deal. So when you think about that, that means some couples don't wait that long, but other couples wait twice that long. It averages out to 6 years, but that's a long time to be living in pain and frustration and stuckness before they get help. What I want you to leave here with tonight is just the understanding of these are some of the ways that we mess up God's plan. God's plan is a perfect plan. Some of the ways that we mess it up I've been going over tonight. But what I want you to take away with you is that there are ways, there are very practical, tried and true ways that we can reconnect, that we can create a culture of safety in our relationship again, and we can recreate that culture of closeness in our relationships again. It doesn't come naturally and it doesn't come easily, and to a certain extent it's going to be like learning a different language. Not altogether, but you're going to have to learn different words and different ways, methods of presentation, different ways to listen. But it is a system that works, and a lot of couples are being helped by this. Thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it. You've got the list. Some of you came in. If you haven't signed the email list to get on my email blog list, then we'll leave it up here at the front if you want to do that after class is over. Let's pray just briefly here. Father, we are ever so grateful every day, all day long, for your goodness and your patience and your kindness and your grace. The way that you treat us is the way that we want to treat each other. You know our faults and our mistakes, and you treat us with love because you'll always love us, and there's nothing we can do to keep you from loving your children. Father, help us to treat each other that way, and help us to grow our relationships in your name, and through your Son's name we pray. Amen.